the crisis in West Asia and the conflict we're seeing, we're now joined by James Bowden, Middle East expert, and Sierra Claire, foreign policy commentator. Thank you so much both for joining us. James Bowden, first to you. We just heard what the US president had to say. He also posted on social media warning that Iran will be hit very hard, mentioning complete destruction, and this coming on, the 8th day as we enter the second week of this conflict. Does it signal that more US military action is imminent?
What I would suggest is that we will see some kind of slow escalation, but exactly what that's going to look at is not very clear. The U.S. has been pretty good about message discipline and not signaling in advance what they are going to do and how they're going to further that escalation. In my view, the likelihood is that we will start to see a shift from a air dominance uh, to a ground dominance. In fact, we're looking at and already seeing news footage and press releases signaling that we may see ground troops put into Iran. And in fact, some of the artillery systems, the rocket artillery, is close ground support artillery. So that definitely says that we are looking at a shift in the operational perspective from the air to the land. Also, we do have these larger bombers which are coming in, and that may signal that we're going to see larger ordnance used in this process. So far, we've seen just a lot of the smaller munitions, if you will, that are carried by the jets, but now we're getting into a phase where they may bring in like the Moab or higher JDAM, more effective weapons to get at those more tactical level targets.
All right, we're already seeing that, moving into the UK base, you have the US B-1B Lancer moving in there. But do you agree, Sierra Claire, that do you feel boots on the ground are imminent? And what is the goal here? What is the end game? Regime pressure, military deterrence, and is the US hoping for a return to negotiations? When we hear this regime change again and again, what really do you think it would look like going forward?
Right. Well, I would not say that I think ground troops are imminent. I know President Trump has said he's keeping that option on the table, but he reserves all of his options, and he recently said that ground troops are he feels they're pointless because of the air superiority that we have gained over Iran, and that's why you're seeing the shift, as the previous guest just said, to the different types of targets now and the different types of munitions that are being used because we're able to shift due to the air superiority. In terms of the regime change goals, I would say that it's regime collapse, and that's an important distinction. President Trump has been very clear that he wants total surrender from this current regime, whatever's left of the Ayatollah, the IRGC. These are the people who are unreasonable, who cannot be negotiated with. And so President Trump wants to see total regime collapse from them. We are seeing already, different other groups stepping forward, talking about setting up transitional governments in Iran. And I think it's very possible that you could see the U.S. lend political support or diplomatic support by recognizing, those regimes and those movements. But President Trump also wants to
But are those
ultimately leave
credible
this up.
movements? Do you really feel there's any credible movement there? So far, it has, been a lot of bluster coming from Iran.
That absolutely, yeah. The Iranian regime is in shambles, I would say right now. The fact that their leadership has been taken out to the third level, I think, is something that people have to look at, because when you're looking at the ability for them to coordinate anything, and you are seeing them try to hit back, but it's in such a sporadic way. And that's why even after the president this morning, President Pezeshkian, said he doesn't want to hit the neighbors, you saw the Iranian regime still sending strikes over to the UAE, because they're just have, at this point, you have the remnants of the IRGC, which is basically a terrorist organization, as we know. And so they're just acting on an individual basis like terrorists, from what I can see.
Well, the IRGC did always, and Iran did always say they would attack US bases and assets in the region should they be attacked. James Borden, your comments, and I do want to ask about what the Iranian president said, Masoud Pezeshkian, when he apologized today to neighboring countries, saying Iran would avoid attacking them unless provoked. It did seem that this was sort of, a dialing down perhaps of the aggression we're seeing. But at the same time, yesterday again, we saw that drones were targeting the UAE, were targeting Dubai airport. And what are we to make of this?
Well, what we should take from that is that there are a lot of isolated commanders, as was just said. They've got commanders who are acting on a rogue basis and firing missiles, or even drones to places like Azerbaijan, and so they've lost a level of tactical control over these people, and that's actually a very scary moment because we don't know exactly all of the munitions that these local commanders possess, and so while the government may be saying, "Hey, we're trying to stop this attack," uh, they now have these elements that are lacking discipline and control. And this is why taking out a large part of the command and control chain tends to be a risky maneuver because you need somebody who is going to be able to say, stop, and have the authority over these people to get them to stop.
That's right, and that is one of the fears that there are some groups that are acting on their own. Given the president's rhetoric today that we heard and saying that we're going to come back with larger strikes, we're going to destroy them, could such rhetoric actually raise the stakes, forcing Iran to respond more aggressively to avoid appearing weak domestically? What is your view first, James Borden?
I do think that the regime is getting scared. I think they're getting to the point of desperation. We started seeing them use cluster munitions in Israel. Now they're sending messages about a possible nuclear strike. And I think that we should start heeding this and taking it seriously because, a lot of these uh, more asymmetric weapons, the nuclear, the chemical, and the biological, these are the last desperate measure weapons. And so when the government feels that it's on the verge of a collapse and it has nothing to lose, it's going to use them or lose them. And governments typically use them. So, yeah, we are facing a government that's very scared, very worried, and is actually likely to pose more of a danger rather than less.
That's right. The sort of statements coming from the U.S. president today have been, a lot of grandstanding and talking about how they're going to increase the strikes in Iran. Sierra Claire, Trump also claimed that Iran surrendered to its Middle East neighbors, what we were just talking about, what the Iran president said. But that really wasn't the case. They did apologized for the strikes in the past, but have said that should they be struck from these areas, they will continue to strike back. And given that Iran is still launching missiles, how credible is this claim that they've made?
Well, I think Iran is, I think the thing to look at with the military response from Iran is their actual ability to do so. And of course, there's a concern about these rogue elements we just talked about. They do have other types of weapons that they could potentially try to be accessing. But if you look at the American strategy here, it was to go after all of these weapons caches. They're going after the underground missile stocks at this point. So, and as Pete Hegseth recently said in an interview, he said, we have the intelligence on the ground. We're aware of all of the communications, everything that's going on, the plans, the targeting that's being discussed on the Iranian side. And so the amount of intelligence access that we have through our partnership with Israel and just on our own as well, I think that the Americans are very well aware of what the Iranian regime might do next, and if there's a risk that they could do something that dirty bombs, whatever. I'm sure the Americans know about that and are working diligently to prevent that or target those weapons caches specifically.
James Borden, given, if we look at history and what we saw happen in Vietnam, even the Afghanistan campaign, and more recently in Iraq as well, there in the past, the US has miscalculated the enemy, and many suggest that it could very well be the same case here, given that this is the eighth day of the conflict, given that so many US assets and bases in the Gulf region have been struck in this manner.
Yes, and I really don't agree with my colleague here that the United States has great intelligence on everything that they uh, may throw at us. The Iranians did announce that they had been able to enrich a certain level of uranium, and this may have been an announcement that was delayed, and they may have shipped some of this outside of the country or to very remote locations. So I think that we don't have a really good grasp of what Iran possesses. I've dealt with military intelligence from a very academic perspective, and I can tell you it is scary to know what the holes are in even American intelligence. The CIA and the American intelligence community is not the premier community that it used to be. And so I still think that it is very likely that they could have lower yield nuclear devices. They could have purchased some from North Korea. There can also be these alternative stocks that they have and are just holding on to. Please refresh my memory on the question. I think I got part of it, but I may have
Think
you
in the
get a.
past, the US has underestimated, its enemies, be it Vietnam, what we saw taking place in Afghanistan, the long war that took place, and then in Iraq, it's Iraq adventure rather the invasion as well. Uh, you know, in Iran as well, maybe they've underestimated.
I think so. I think that going back to the Gulf War and how quickly that was resolved, a lot of people felt that war was almost obsolete. That countries would be impressed with United States capabilities and Western power and would just kind of throw down their arms and surrender. And over the last few years and through these conflicts, we're starting to see that that's not the case. The Iranians have not yielded and they are continuing to fight. I'm just now actually doing an analysis on an issue going back to World War II, where the United States thought, hey, we are not going to likely face challenges. And the Japanese hold out some last stops. So, yes, I think that the American government may have thought that the Iranian government would have
Iraq,
thought.
I mean, given how long after that the US had to stay there to ensure that the area was stable, and then, of course, what we saw in Syria and then the emergence of ISIS. But Sierra Claire, coming onto another issue, which the Trump administration hasn't really addressed publicly to, or they've kind of brushed it aside. These reports suggesting that Russia may be providing Iran with targeting information on the US warships, on military assets in the Middle East. If true, this does mark an escalation that internationalizes the conflict beyond the region.
Well, we've known for a long time about the military partnership between Russia and Iran, and I think that although it may not be an immediate reason for President Trump's involvement in Iran now, it's certainly a consideration because of what President Trump wants to see happen in Ukraine, and Iran was providing drones to Russia in their Ukraine conflict, and so all of these things are related, and President Trump wants to see peace in the world. So, uh, he goes after these certain things to get those results. But in terms of, us, our bases, our attacks on us, Pete Hegseth did address that recently, and I believe he confirmed that we do know that Russia is involved here, and we're actually quite
But
aware.
kind of played it down, it seemed. Sort of like right now we're talking about Iran, we're not going to,
Well,
that's secondary.
yeah, I mean, and to respond to the last point, I actually agree. I think that we have underestimated things in the past, and I think it's really important we've learned from that. And you're seeing that those strategies and those learnings being applied right now in this actual conflict and in the way that the military is approaching this conflict, and in terms of the Russian threat as well. We're aware that there are other involvements, that there are intelligence information coming from Russia, that there's weapons that are coming from China. And so we're not going into this, in a way
All
that we
right.
have in the past, where we were looking at Iraq thinking they're acting, on their own, and we can just kind of wrap this all up in a nice bow. I think we're very aware that it's messy, and the U.S. military is acting accordingly, and you're seeing that total domination.
All right. A final word to you, James Borden.
Uh, just I think that the operations are going well, yes, and I think that this operation has gone probably better and more smoothly than the administration had counted on. The only thing that I can continue to identify as an oversight is dealing with the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf. I think the government should have been more proactive in providing sufficient naval assets in the region to escort ships immediately. Maybe not day one or two, but starting around three or four, we should have had these vessels on the move because, quite frankly, the ships being all parked on either side of the strait is a great target, and I'm not sure why Iran has ignored that. These vessels would be better off moving and just plowing through full speed. So
All right.
I think that
All right, we'll leave it then. Thank you both joining us from the United States there. Thank you, really. And